let's get started. Maybe we can finish early and get to the donuts before everybody else. You ready? Ready there? Good. How about this guy? Is he ready? Tony. All right. There's some new faces in the room. We had more people actually sign up yesterday than I expected. So I have our presentations on a thumb drive, and they will be on the Ultranet. But I apologize, I don't have more right now. They will be available to you afterward. For those who don't know me, I'm Jim Graham. I'm the brand new communications director for all of Burning Man. A 17-year burner. I was the Santa Cruz regional coordinator for 7 years, and I have a background in crisis communications. So that's what today is all going to be about. Things go south.
And I'm Tom LaPorte. I'm Assistant Water Commissioner for the City of Chicago, but I have a 25-year background in radio news, mostly in Chicago. And so I've got crisis communications from both sides, the reporter covering it, the spot news, and the breaking news type stuff. We were an all-news station for CBS, so we would go wall to wall and that kind of thing. And then as spokesman for the City of Chicago, which has a tendency to break, I get trotted out to explain what's going on, to change the subject, and whatever's necessary to get the city back together. Yeah,
so in terms of crisis communication, some of the stuff that I've dealt with, I've had to deal with rocket explosions, a couple of plane crashes, terrorists, that was a good one. And within Burning Man itself, a lot of the stuff that you encounter is death, people getting seriously injured, people generally doing dumb stuff, and our goal is to kind of keep that below the radar screen on that. Last year, one that I'll use an example on is we had she was 16 years old, the girl who ran away.
Yeah, Nikki.
Dear Nikki, who ran away from her dad's camp and went into hiding, and we had to actually lock down the entire city to hunt her down, which we were successful at.
And my breaking news at Burning Man included the burning early of the man in 2007. The green year of the man burned on Monday night. That was a big thing that the media was terribly interested in. And also Katrina. And one of the things we'll be talking about is, as news breaks outside or inside your city, you're still responsible for figuring out who needs to know what and helping them find it out. Because we had people who needed to find out about their loved ones on the coast who might or might not have survived Katrina, whether their houses were still standing, and we put the word out to get satellite phones and that kind of stuff. So it gets pretty dramatic, and you may be addressing the larger public, you may be dealing with the media, or you may be sort of ad-libbing or creating the media that you need to get the word out to your local population.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've all heard the cliche, adversity builds character. That's bullshit. You want to see what your friends and coworkers are like in adversity? Put them in a situation where somebody has been injured or killed, or there's law enforcement taking over someplace, and 90% of them will just absolutely go bait shit, or bat shit. It's up to you, if you guys are the communications ones, to remain calm and be that centered force that helps everybody get through it.
And that means talking in a calm voice, projecting calm as well as being calm, taking the higher view and paying attention to what people need. I mean, as an editor in the newsroom, if news is breaking, everybody's flying around, you have two facts, you've thrown out all the commercials. You need to keep your eye on your anchors and on your reporters, know who's freaking out, who needs what, a little reassurance or some more facts, that kind of thing. And you need to do that in the organization too. If you have people who are dealing with law enforcement coming in and people who they're meant to be supervising kind of freaking out and they're beginning to get overloaded, your ability to be that higher view and recognize that the leader needs a little help too, a little support and calming, that can be important. That can be your job.
And a key part of doing all of this, or achieving this and be successful at it, is actually planning in advance for something to go wrong. And we're going to talk about some scenarios that regionals have actually dealt with over the years, and they're like the standard things that if you're doing a regional event of some sort, you can plan for something like that. If you even have a generic plan in place to say, oh, somebody injured themselves severely and had to be taken out in an ambulance, or somebody got in a car crash coming into your event or on the way to your event, you might think, okay, that didn't happen at our event, so it doesn't count against us. It does, because they will, the word will get out to the press, oh, they were headed to the Alabama event or the Georgia event or wherever it was. And so they will link something like that to your event, and you've got to be ready for it. And there are processes that are pretty easy to plan for to make that happen.
And you become the newsroom. I mean, you're not, when I talk about giving the leader what they need, you're the, oftentimes in the position of having to vet the facts, decide what's a rumor, what's not a rumor, figure out whether you need to confirm something, and in a coherent way that makes sense to the leader who's trying to supervise other people, present the facts and be ready to write the press release or to compose the statement and to do it in coordination with other agencies. But that's when journalism kicks in. That's when you've got to be right and you've got to not go beyond what you actually know. And you've got to do it in a way that's going to be both calming and informative to people and not just repeating the last rumor you heard.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because Tom and I have worked with a lot of the regionals over the years, and part of the deal is if you suffer through our presentation today, you get our phone numbers. So if something does go wrong at the very end, you can actually call us up, and it's mostly going to be Tom you're going to call first, and say, we just had fill in the blank happen to us, help. And we will walk you through the process of what to plan for moving out. Go ahead.
And well, the reason you're going to be calling me first is when I hear about disasters, I really want to get in on them. Being in this position where we help a lot of the regionals, we typically hear pretty quickly when something goes bad. And so we watch, I'll just hop onto either Facebook or their discussion group or Twitter or whatever, and you can actually see a lot of stuff happening when people start to report. And particularly if your event is where there is cell phone coverage, people are going to start posting photos, they're going to start live tweeting it, they're going to go on Facebook, and that's going to happen before you as the organizer is going to react to it. So you've got to get ready for that. But here's the stuff that I guarantee you, with 100% certainty, will happen to you when you get up there. Is people will see the same thing, will recollect it differently. I've just seen that in many situations. I say, tell me what happened. They'll tell me, I'll go to another person who's standing right next to them, tell me what happened, and they'll tell me something slightly different. But it's enough of a difference, it's like, okay, what did really happen there? Cops love that when they interview people. They like to interview people separately because they want to get these different perspectives, and then they'll play them off against each other. Well, somebody else said this, now who's lying here? They may not be lying, they may have actually perceived it differently. What the actual happened might be somewhere in the middle. But cops love that because they can use it. People who work witnesses will claim to be. There are people who are literally not on site at events who will claim that they saw something and then chime in with their opinion. Then you get what I call the peanut gallery. The people who work on site are going to become instant experts, and they know how it should have been done. You probably lived through countless amounts of that as well, where everything you do is going to be second guessed because you obviously don't know what you're doing because this happened in the first place. What I find, in fact, we were just talking about something. The vast majority of stuff that happens at an event usually isn't deliberate. People don't do something like that. They get drunk. They make a mistake. They get drunk and then make a mistake. I was the Santa Cruz Regional Coordinator, and I would do events at a beach overnight, and we had about 150 people. It was tremendous fun and awesome. I walked up one night, and who saw Spark? The movie? Saw Spark? Remember the jump of death? It was like a milk crate with a plank on it, and people ride their bikes over it. I walked up one night, and imagine the milk crate with this, and a 6-foot fire pit, and a bunch of guys holding beer standing there. And I am like, what the fuck? And I look over, and there's a guy on a little Stingray sitting there looking at me like this. And I am like, you are not. And I go, I said, God, I said, you're all, just go to the beach or something. I threw the stuff in the fire. This guy was ready to, a drunk guy was ready to ride a Stingray over a thing. He said he thought he could clear a 6-foot fire pit. It was just going to be a barbecue right there. People who do dumb stuff, you can't plan for that. You can plan in the sense of generically something's going to go wrong, but you can't plan the idiocy that people will do. So some preemptive common sense works well.
Works tremendously well on that. What happened to my thing? Go home. Hang on a second. We're pretty bad. Tom, Phil.
When something like this happens, you learn how to fill. Who can count to 100? What I can tell you is that as you're dealing with the people who you're working with, who are running the event and that kind of thing, it's very important that you be reporting and have a direct relationship with the top person. You don't want to have your advice and comments and content filter through anybody else. And you also need to know them well enough and have enough advanced conversation that you know whether or not they're going to be bringing their prejudices to the relationship they have with the press. If you're suddenly dealing with reporters, or you're dealing with camera people and that kind of stuff, and you have somebody who's leading the event who has not trusted overground media forever and thinks they're all in the corporate back pocket of Donald Trump or something, you're going to be dealing with a lot of prejudices that need to be sorted out, and their ability to be candid and to not look like they're under siege or facing their enemies and that kind of stuff. It's very important if you're trying to either reassure people on the outside world or be believable, as you made your statement.
Your integrity is everything. Some more of what to expect. This is ebook on the grist for forums, Facebook, Twitter, and blogs. A perfect example of this is when Paul Addis ignited the man early. I wasn't out at the event at that time, and I woke up at about probably 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Burning Man had not responded to that yet. It didn't burn, but they hadn't pulled together a press conference or anything. Already on my basically instant messaging feed, I had 5 people who just texted me from the event, because you still had internet at that time, saying, the van went up. And by 8:30, about 8:45 in the morning, I was receiving photographs of Paul Addis climbing on the man. And this was before Burning Man had responded to anything. So if I could get that, that could just as easily have gone out on Facebook. There are always TV crews and there are always newspaper people tracking what's going on at Burning Man and following our social media stuff for things exactly like that. So I get it. You can expect that if you're doing an event and something happens, it's going to get out there very quick. You don't have a lot of time to respond. And there's ways you can respond without a lot of information to give people some information and say that more is coming, but you don't have a lot of time. Media will find these people and misquote them. One of the greatest, Fox News has dialed this thing in. What they say is, some people are saying, and then they say whatever they want you to respond to. It doesn't matter if someone said it or not. They say, some people are saying. I'd like to say, some people think you're a douche. Police and politicians will trash you anonymously. If there's any political risk for them in that, they will go to reporters and say, this should never have happened in the first place. And then concerned citizens will line up to shut you down. There's been a number of regional events who've had concerned citizens go to city council, or what they're typically good at is what I call the peanut gallery, which if there's a newspaper story or a feature on a burner type event that's going to happen, there was one recently in Nevada where there was a huge number of comments from people saying, oh, this is hippies and nude and distributing drugs and stuff in here. And city officials reacted in part to those comments that were in that, like, oh my God, you don't want this stuff here. And so you've got to be ready for those anonymous commenters. There's ways to deal with those as well too. But get ready, because it's going to happen whether you like it or not.
And there's 2 other things going on in the press right now. Some stations, and this is an increasing trend, are telling reporters, you're the lead story, or something like that. And that means that they've got to come up with a story, they've got to sell it to their editor, it's got to have adequate conflict and sex appeal and that kind of stuff. So they'll say, okay, the murder thing's coming up and it's going to be terrible, there's going to be a lot of drugs and that kind of stuff. Once the editor's bought it, they're not going to depart from that storyline. So now you've got to deal with the fact that they're trying to tell a story that they preconceived and brought their own prejudices to, and the facts aren't necessary. So they'll take some neighbor saying, yeah, I've heard about this, it's terrible, and I don't know what to expect, and we don't have enough cops on the beat. And that's news. I mean, from a journalistic standpoint, all they have to do is put on accurate information. So they don't need to say this is all going to happen. In the same way that when they say that there's a murder, somebody's been charged with murder, you'll notice in the script it always says police say. Because that's the news event, is the police are saying it, not that this person, so they're not convicting the person who's presumed innocent. They're just saying police say. And so they'll go to the neighbor saying, hey, I don't know what's going on, but it's going to be terrible. And that's good enough for the reporter to deliver that story to the editor. The other thing that you'll find is that when something happens, they need sound no matter what, or if it's radio. My background is radio, but they need sound, they need pictures. And I can tell you how I figured out how the internet was going to be significant. It was in 1997, after I put the Democratic National Convention online for the city of Chicago, and was the only person in the CBS newsroom who actually knew how to get on the internet. Literally. Everybody else was taking out the mouse and doing that. So, and there was a one-line bulletin on the AP saying that Richard Jewell had been identified as the suspect in the Atlanta Olympic bombing.
Yes.
And nobody had anything else in any newsroom in town, just this one line from AP. I jumped on the internet. I went to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution site and read the story, figured out that Richard Jewell had been a deputy sheriff from some rural county of Georgia. Saw a picture of him, saw that he was somewhat overweight, so I called up, I figured out on the internet how the chamber of, what the county seat was. Called the Chamber of Commerce for the county seat and said, what's the diner closest to the jail? Figuring that this guy got a piece of pie every time he put somebody in the slammer. Within 3 minutes, I had somebody on the phone that I was reporting reporting and saying, yeah, that son of a bitch gave me a ticket 2 years ago, and this doesn't surprise me a bit. So I was taking some guy with a grudge, putting him on the radio, and calling it news coverage.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Very sorry.
But that's all, that'll happen. Anecdotes like that are fantastic things for reporters. When I was a reporter, I loved doing stuff like that. So before I switch to the next slide, I'm going to tell you, here's some scenarios. How do you plan for crisis communications? You want to start thinking about the scenarios you might encounter. So I'm going to give you, I talked lightly about these, but you want to think about the scenarios you encounter, and then what I do is I do a mental walkthrough. If this happened, what do I do? What's the process I would do upon being told this thing had happened? So here's some that they dealt with. There was a participant who decided to jump over a burning effigy, tripped on a hay bale, and fell into the fire. Second and third degree burns that person had, they did, however, survive. Second one, a participant wearing a synthetic jacket bumped into a tiki torch, caught fire and ran about 90 feet. They know they ran about 90 feet because there was a trail of fire from the melted jacket about 90 feet long.
That's awesome.
Yes, there wasn't. Okay, another one. A participant was medevaced out during an event. I think it might have actually been an ambulance. Taken out during the event because of probably dehydration. I'm not saying drugs or anything like that. There's something that came up. She was medevaced out of the event. The event went on. It ended. She was released from the hospital, perfectly good, collected her stuff, got her car, drove, and something happened, passed out or something, crashed her car, and was injured. Not died, but injured. That was linked to the event as well. Another one, city officials banned an event days before it was supposed to start. Basically just said, we're not going to approve one permit. They found one permit they could pull to stop it. And it's like, the organizers, we've got all these people coming, now what we do with this. Plan for that. Or you want to think through what would happen if something like that happened. Last one, concerned citizens. Put pressure on city officials and private landowners. You think you're safe if you go on private land? It doesn't make any difference, because if city officials want to come after you, they'll find a way to do it. They'll find something that they can block you. Put pressure on city officials and private landowners to prevent an event from taking place on private land. So depending on what type of event you're doing and whether these scenarios apply to you, you're going to want to start thinking about, well, in advance of the event, what would I do if this happened? And that includes, how are you going to organize, how is the board or your organizing group going to respond to this? How are you going to get the word out to your participants? Who are the other audiences that are going to have an interest in this beyond just your board members, say city officials, and participants? And I'm going to give you an example of audiences, why you want to think about audiences bigger than just that group right there. And this is from something I lived through. When I was the head of PR for Lockheed, we had a rocket explode after launch. And that was a big enough crisis as it was, in that it was a test rocket and blew up and such. But I had a crisis plan, communications plan in place, and I had 40 reporters who went out to watch this, and rocket blows up, and I didn't know about it. So they're coming back in a bus, and I'm in my own car. First reporter gets off and says, "Hey Jim, the rocket blew up." I'm like, "Fuck!" And she says, "Can I quote you on that?" I said, "No!" And they go, "What are you going to do?" I said, "We're going to have a press conference in 2 hours like we planned before, and we're going to brief you on whatever we know at that point." Because I had planned for the eventuality of what if this thing blows up, what are we going to do? We had a process in place for that. What that process was going to be was I was going to have the project manager for the rocket and the project manager for the satellite, which are two different entire teams, basically come and say, here's what the telemetry showed, and the key message was, we're going to work together to figure out why this happened, and then we're going to put stuff in place to make sure it never happens again. So I'm saying, okay, I said, go sit, it's going to take me a couple hours to get this together, but it's going to happen. I walk over to another building separate from where the press conference is going to take place, where the two program managers were. Walking down the hallway toward the room, I can hear them screaming at each other from easily 50 yards away. They are pissed. What they're arguing over is who's going to pay the $10 million for the satellite that got blown up out of this thing. And I walked into the room and I said, guys, I need you for 20 minutes to be best friends. We need to walk into that press room over there, and we have to say, we're working on this thing, we're in this together, we're going to get it sorted out, and we're going to tell you. I said, just 20 minutes, do that for me. And they went, okay. They walked in there, and they were angels. They were hugging, they said, this is a chat, this is new technology, they're challenging, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to let you know what happened, and how we're going to fix it. They walked up, And they walked, and they got far enough away, and they started screaming. And I didn't care because I was successful. That doesn't relate to the audience question. What happened next was that I went back to my hotel room and I started writing up the press release. And I got a phone call with the most terrifying sentence in the English language, and it was, "Please hold for Mr. McMahon." Mr. McMahon was the former deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who was now my boss's 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 boss. And I'm like, fuck. The first time I was scared in all of this, because I planned for everything else. And he gets on the line and he says, "What the fuck happened?" He doesn't even know who I am. He says, "What the fuck happened?" I said, "The rocket blew up." He goes, "I know that. Why did it blow up?" And I said, and because I had sources in the program, I said, "I've heard that it was a glitch in the guidance system that caused the engine to throttle 90 degrees sideways." And he goes, "Was anybody hurt?" I said, "No." He goes, "Where did it land?" I said, "Out in the water." "How far?" I said, "Way out." He goes, "Click." And I just leaned over and I started trying to do it. Was I hadn't anticipated an audience that I might have to address, which was shareholders and senior executives of all of Lockheed Corporation. I hadn't expected to do that because it wasn't my job. The program manager for the rocket had turned off his cell phone, and the secretary, McMahon's secretary, couldn't get through to him. She knew me, and so she says, "Well, I'm going to call Jim." And so I was just shaking for a long time. But you have to anticipate different types of audiences. Different types of audiences would include, in addition to burners, your board members, city officials, cops, neighbors, concerned citizen groups, reporters, parents, those things. The messages might be different in terms of what you're going to say, but you have, when you're planning for a crisis or a generic type of crisis, think there's going to be more people out there listening than you would normally think about.
And two things on that also. You may also find if you're at a hot button issue where there's people who are far to the right in campaigning for office or something like that, they'll use the occasion to build their base a little bit or see an opportunity to take a jab at you and that kind of stuff. And you've got to be thoughtful about how you respond to that, if you respond to it, because you don't necessarily have to respond to everything that's said or every hostile question that comes your way. Another aspect worth considering is that sometime far enough in advance of the event that the organizers aren't all running around trying to figure out deliveries and that kind of thing, you might consider having a drill. And what they call is a tabletop exercise. And that's where you gather all the participants around, and you have, if you need to, have people representing the police point of view or the mayor's point of view or that kind of stuff. And you go thoughtfully through, okay, you said that, what's going to happen here? What's your response going to be? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to have a perimeter? I know you got to, you're charging to. This is one thing that came up when the man burned early, was, are we going to charge reporters full ticket price to come in and cover this? And my point of view was, you keep them outside, they're going to stand in front of the gate saying something's happening and decide they're not letting us see it. So you've got to let them in and make the exception. But thinking it through in advance and helping people understand what other sectors and other audiences are going to be worried about or caring about is going to help them when the time comes to think clearly.
And this is interactive, so please ask us questions throughout this.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the point that you're dealing with different audiences, basically.
Yeah.
And you might want to gear your message to them. But at the same time, it's probably important to make sure that the team remains consistent.
Yes.
Because you don't want to be telling one person one thing and
Exactly.
another thing. Maybe you want to emphasize something like that group.
Yes, and typically what will happen, and I think we'll get to it here, and it's definitely in the printed material, you develop a core set of messages, which you can actually do in advance, based on the scenarios you think you might encounter, and then you put different emphasis on those key messages based on the audience that you're talking to. And so, seriously, the first part though is just take some time in advance and say, these potential things could happen, how would we do it, and run a set of scenarios with it. There's also something that happened, something might happen that you would never expect. And I can give you an example of this, is again, I was at Lockheed one day and I got a phone call from an engineer. He says, "Hey, I'm Joe over in building 102. He says, "We got a water leak in the ceiling." I said, "Okay, why are you telling me?" He says, "Well, it's dripping water, it's pouring water onto this," and he mentioned something that was a capacitor. And he says, "If it gets wet, it's going to explode." And I'm like, I said, how big of an explosion? He says, "Oh, it's going to be big." And he says, "I got to go. We got to evacuate the building." I said, "Okay." And I sat there and said, I don't have a plan for an explosion. But it's like immediately then, there's things you can put in place. All right, if this thing explodes, was anybody injured? Is anybody going to hear it? You know, how soon is it going to get out to the press? And since I had my press list, I could say, all right, here's the steps. My first call was to our emergency services coordinator. And at this point, cell phones were still those suitcase kind of things. I called him, and he knew. He says, I'm on it! And he says, like, okay, it's done. So the reason you want to plan for this stuff is so you have more time to deal with the unexpected things. You can have a generic plan in place and then modify it as you get more information.
And you can do enough rehearsing on answering questions so that you're able to pivot on a question and say something else that's not really any question. Like if they call up and say, what the hell's going on and who's to blame? You can say, well, the most important thing right now is to get service restored to the community and to make sure that everybody's safe. And we're doing that and we're working closely with the police. You know, that kind of thing can be reassuring and sound responsive without actually providing facts.
Yeah. Okay, these things here, when bad things happen, what you want to avoid doing. And the reason I put these up here, I've made every single one of these mistakes, so you don't have to. This is avoid assigning responsibility or blame to anyone because you don't know. The easiest way to answer a question that you don't have the answer to is say, I don't have that information right now, let me find it and get back to you. That's great on two different areas. And number one, you're not screwing yourself over immediately. And number two, it's giving you an opportunity to get back to that reporter when you actually do have the information. So you can keep the conversation going on something. Never ever speculate. Because if something happens and they'd say, well, do you think this person impaled themselves on that rebar because they were on drugs? Well, it could have been that, but it could have been several other things. The story that's going to come out is, yeah, Burning spokesman says it could have been drugs that caused this person to die. I would do that. When I was a young reporter, it's like, yeah, I love it. You always want to correct a reporter's assumptions. If they've got a wrong assumption about why something happened, you know, is this, well, this is a drug-infused event. No, it's not. You know, I don't agree with your perception. What you can say is, I don't agree with your description of this. I see it, and this is called a bridging technique, and it's listed very detailed in our documentation. There's techniques you can use to bridge from a negative thing you don't want to be quoted on to something positive, or at least what your key message is. Well, I disagree with your assumption. What I see it as is blah, blah, blah. You're not acknowledging the negative thing that a reporter has said to you. You're disagreeing with it, and you're transitioning or bridging to the positive statement.
Yeah, be careful not to repeat the accusation.
Yeah, and if you're in the class yesterday, my epic one of that was from 1999 with the poop, when we had the poop fiasco. And the Salon reporter said, basically, he says, that was a disaster. And I said, I wouldn't consider that a disaster. And that, I said, I realized right then, that's the quote that the person was going to use. And I said, you're going to use that, aren't you? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, all right, that's cool. Can I have the second half of the quote to say this? And he said, sure, whatever. And so I got the second half of the quote to say, I wouldn't call it a disaster. Here's what we put in place to make sure this never happens again. So try not to repeat a negative statement because they will use it because it's awesome, because negative statements are awesome. In a situation, particularly when you're in a crisis where there's been somebody hurt or killed or something, shit's blown up, never go off the record. Never, ever go off the record because they'll use it. Everybody is looking for something, an edge, an angle that nobody else has. Even with reporters I absolutely trust, I never go off the record on anything during a crisis. It's like, I don't know, I'll let you know when I have something. Even if you did go off the record, they'll try to confirm it somewhere else, and if they get an on-the-record confirmation from the cops or somebody else or an anonymous source, they'll go with it. So don't give them ammunition to turn after you.
Let me say something too, which is that reporters who are trying to cover it are in the same panic situation that you are. They're meant to be on the air in 20 minutes with facts, with a report. They just got on the scene. They don't know what's going on. They're in a smaller market. You've got a younger reporter who may not be seasoned and may not know how to fill. They're in a panic too. So you got to be very careful what you say, and they may not catch that it's off the record. So that's one reason to stay on the record. This is in the same spirit that every microphone is always live, every camera is always rolling, every statement's on the record. Now, what you can do is. If you know the reporter, or if some reporter comes running up and saying, I heard that 14 people were killed, because they pick up rumors, that's part of what they do. And in the old days, I don't know if it's still done, but in the old days, as a reporter, we would sit on the side and listen to cordless phone conversations between the neighbors, and then go to the cops and say, can you confirm this? They'd get mad because they figured one of their own was leaking to us, and we'd throw them into some confusion, but we would know what the story was. So that's how they pick up rumors. And if they say, hey, I heard 14 people were killed, they say, no. way for getting facts, but yeah, that's absolutely wrong. So your ability to guide them a little bit in a way that's not, you know, or you could say, you know, that's for the police to decide, but police to announce, but I can tell you, yeah, 2 people got hurt, transport or something like that. Get the straight story, but don't necessarily put yourself on the record with it too.
It's not being defensive in response to.
Yeah, they're not the enemy. They're trying to do a job and they're trying to get the word out. They're trying to report to a public that's eager to know. So the fact that they're asking adversarial questions does not mean that they're enemies or that they're sniping at you. And your ability to bridge between a community that's in crisis, possibly under siege, and a press corps that's terribly eager and under a lot of pressure to get immediate facts, your ability to be calm and to recognize what each group needs, that's where it kicks in.
Cool. All right, next. What about that? You did. When all else fails, here's the go-to statement you want to use at the outset of any crisis. It's going to buy you 24 hours.
With the exception of ticket sales.
Except ticket sales. Watch CNN or, God forbid, Fox News or whatever it is you watch. Anytime there is a major crisis and a PR person is made to stand up in front of a camera, the first thing they're going to say is some variation of that. It's in 3 parts. The first sentence focuses on empathy with the victim's families, like that. Our heart, I can do it from
Can you scoot a little bit?
Wait, where's the camera? How's that look?
Yeah. You need a hat. Thank you.
All right. It's a terrible tragedy. You're acknowledging that this was not a nice thing to happen. It's a terrible tragedy, and our hearts and prayers, if you're religious, whatever it is, go out to the injured and his or her family, or their families. That's the first phase. You're showing empathy as the organizers to this. You're not denying, culpability or anything. You're showing empathy. Second one is you want to demonstrate that you are cooperating with an investigation into this. It's usually law enforcement. So we say we're cooperating fully with authorities in their investigation. And then the third part is you're saying what's going to happen in the future, which is once we've completed our research into this, we're going to put policies in place to ensure it never happens again. That will buy you 24 hours right off the bat. If you have a tragedy that happens, or if you have a situation that happens where you've got reporters out there, there's 2 types of stories. There's the first day story, which focuses typically on whatever the mess is that happened. Then you have what are called second day stories, which are, let's figure out who to blame for this, right? You've got the glitz of the damage at first, and then it's like, all right, who's at fault for this? There's a separate strategy for dealing with those kinds of stories. But this, I guarantee you, will buy you 24 hours. I've used it countless times.
But 2 other things on that. One is, don't be afraid to give out partial facts. Stories develop over time, injuries are totaled over time. The press needs facts promptly. So if you know some stuff, be willing to tell it. Coordinate also with the emergency people on the scene. The police are the best source of who's been transported, and but they may have an agenda, so you want to be in coordination with them, knowing what they're going to say, able to be either support it or know that they're going to say, this is exactly what the chief was talking about when he said we shouldn't give them a permit. That kind of thing you need to be aware of, which means you have to have rapport with them. And just parenthetically, bring a good shirt and some nice clothes so that you're not showing up looking like a halfway. You may be standing in line behind the mayor as he makes a statement, or the police chief or something like that. But don't be afraid to give out partial facts, and if you're going to give out partial facts, to the extent possible, number 1, talk calmly. Don't shout into the camera, don't be in a hurry. Did anybody know the story of Al Haig and how he fell into disfavor? This is the former Secretary of State during the Reagan years. He was the first Secretary of State. He was, at the time, I think, Chief of Staff. Yeah, he was Chief of Staff, and Reagan had just been shot. He was Secretary of State. Anyway, Reagan had just been shot, and Bush was off in the clouds somewhere, and Haig was in the White House in the Situation Room, and he heard the questions up live at the podium in the press room. Who's in charge here? Who's in charge here? His thought, which was a legitimate one, was somebody has to show up and reassure the country. The problem he ran into was he ran up the stairs. He showed up at the podium completely out of breath. Everything's under control. I'm in charge here. And I'll be the president until the president gets well. He got the Constitution wrong. So that doesn't do anything good for the markets. So make sure that take a deep rather than, and make sure that you're being calm with it. And also, to the extent appropriate, check with the officials so that you're not second guessing them, you're not preempting them, so that when they get to the podium, they're not trying to overcome what they think you said wrong or anything like that.
It's, I mean, you see a lot of, oh, you got, where's the question?
Yeah, so just kind of related to this, which is like, bringing that shirt in case you have to talk. How do you determine, like, in advance, like, who should be the media content? Because sometimes, like, smaller events, it would be you're the producer or something. Other times, you have a dedicated media person. How do you decide where you're at that point where you should be pre-assigning someone to just sort of think about those things and do all that planning in advance?
Sometime in advance of the event. How's that? It's, I mean, it may vary from event to event, but how I would approach that from the start is this the type of event where something like that could happen? I mean, a concert could do it, a rave could have something like that. Get together at a bar, probably not. But if you get to that point where there is potential for something to go wrong, that's when you want to get everybody, or all of the organizers together and say, hey, I don't mean to sound paranoid, but let's start planning for this, because something could happen. And it does. And it's, you have the best, the most well-meaning people I see right there. Well-meaning people in the world, somebody can do something stupid. Go.
I just had a question. You talked about giving out partial facts. I was just wondering where being economical with proof, as you know, it crosses the line. An example, 2 years ago we had a huge hammock thing collapse. We ended up with loads of people being medically extracted from the site.
Yes.
4 hours later I have a report to turn up again, so I think there's been an accident. And I'm like, well, yeah, so were people badly hurt? But my current understanding is that everyone has been released from hospital. I knew most of the people had been released from hospital, and I didn't know what the extent of the injuries were.
I'm sorry.
So I'm stretching the truth a little bit in that statement. It's my current understanding. My current understanding could be wrong.
No, I wouldn't do that, because even though you've hedged it in what I view as a smart way, my current understanding is this case, what I would only go with is what I absolutely knew to be true, which would be there was an incident that took place, a number of people were transported to the hospital, were waiting to hear word on their status. And that way, what you say is one thing, what somebody hears is something different.
And you don't want to speculate and say we don't think any of them are life-threatening or put an optimistic spin on it. And you also have to be careful of their HIPAA rights. Privacy medical privacy is an important issue, and people are entitled to it. So you standing around speculating or even saying things that aren't speculative, that are true about their medical conditions is inappropriate. Refer to the fire department.
Yeah, you can talk to the police or have them call the hospital, whatever, but just always stick to what you know is true. It's a funny thing because I ran Media Mecca for several years, and I wish I had a weather map of the city because the rumors that would sweep through the community were awesome. And it was like, yeah, exactly. And there was somebody out there, I wish I could find this person, every year would start a share room. And it was like, Cher's doing a concert at the foot of the man, the night of the bird, and I would just watch this. And what are you people thinking? We'll do that. Yeah, it was trash, exactly. There was one, we had some C-130s from, it was probably Fallon, fly over, because the C-130 guys love to go to the city. And that became, not mercenaries, it was like a special forces team was dropped outside the fence and they were going to come in. And I've got a great, somebody took a photo of me standing, getting briefed by one of my media team captains, briefing me on this. And I'm like, I'm not dealing with this thing. But these rumors would just sweep through, and it's like, come on, people, think about it. But then you have to know the difference between what's a rumor and what you absolutely know is fact. And a reporter will respect that. So if I said, what I absolutely know is fact is this, this, and this, I don't know this and this. Okay, well, you said that's something to go with.
Well, the last thing a reporter wants to do is backtrack on something they reported inaccurately.
Go.
I just wanted to add a specific wording question. Obviously, we've had some injuries.
Yes.
And one of the first things the community always wants to know is everyone okay? And obviously, we can't say everybody's okay, they're going to recover completely before we know what words do we use. Obviously, nobody died. What words?
Yeah.
Or safe to say, the last we heard, everyone
This is to
was
your
actually alive.
Reporter of the community.
Community.
Would it be now?
Because they start asking us, obviously, at firm before.
Yeah. Okay,
And it's
so-
always very hard to try to pick the words where, because if you just, you know this, if you shut down and don't say anything,
Yeah.
then they just start making shit up. So try to
Right.
say minimal and say positive, but what are the safest
Words
words?
you could say. What,
Yeah.
The question, in case you heard it, was there were injuries in the event, people were transported to the hospital. The community wants to know, how is everybody doing? And typically what I do is because it's something that a media media could see, whether it's on a forum or face to face, I might say one thing. But if you've got a group, somebody might be able to
Can
see
you give us
something.
both? Would you mind?
Yeah, if if I'm talking to you, what happened? I would go and they'd ask, what's the status? I'd say, I've heard everybody's okay, there's some that are still in the hospital, we're monitoring. I always want to say, as soon as I know how everybody's doing, I'll let you know. We've heard some people have been released. If you know that to be the fact.
Monitoring is a great word.
Yeah, we're monitoring the situation. And so does that it's like,
Yes.
stick with and say you're monitoring, so it gives you the open.
And let me just add, in terms of, and then we'll get to you, that the community will be very interested, particularly if something's happening. One of the things I did in 2005, and this is my second burn, was with my radio background, volunteered to create the emergency broadcast system for Burning Man. And basically we took all radio stations and talked and went through ourselves through a drill of coordinated PSAs and news reports, and then simulcast where they all plug their radios, their radios and transmitters into the DMIR signal, so we could simulcast if we needed to. The day we did that happened to be the day Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, and our system became immediately useful. And to this day, when this kid disappeared last burn, we were asked to help put the word out and that kind of thing. So think through how are we going to get the word out physically and actually to the community. The other thing is to remember that reporters defend themselves from trauma and keep their perspective in part by making jokes. When I walked into the Gazette, there was a year where a couple of burners were parachuting in, their main chutes failed to open. They had to come down kind of hard using their reserve chutes. I walked into the Gazette office and the editor looked up at me and said, "Hey Tom, it's raining dorks." And, I had another guy come stamping into a newsroom, a radio newsroom, in the middle of a blizzard, and a Flophouse hotel had burned down, a couple guys had died, and this guy comes stamping in saying, "Those guys weren't burned to death, they were flambéed." So you're going to be dealing with people who have caustic senses of humor in the same way cops do, in the same way that ER people do, and be ready for that.
I see. Go.
Oh, I was just curious. Let's say some horrible thing has happened, we have multiple injuries or whatever. We said the right thing to all the reporters, everybody.
Yeah.
But I'll talk to Izzy because she's my co-lead on whatever.
Yeah.
This guy hears,
Yes.
and he's a reporter.
Yep.
And we think we're private and we're talking about this because
Yes.
we have to deal with it. Somebody else hears about it and it goes out. What can we do now?
Cry.
Right.
What do you do? Okay, the question she asked, in case you didn't hear, is...
I mean, this could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. No, it does happen because I do that as a reporter. I used to do those reports. The question was, what if you think you're having a private conversation with someone, but a reporter overhears it? What I would do as a reporter when I was covering NASA was, lunchtime, I go down and eat in the NASA cafeteria. It's just, nobody thinks the reporters will be there. You get the best stories. You hear all the scandal, you hear all the gossip, because people are talking over lunch. I would just sit there, and then I would go report on that stuff. If you need to have a private conversation about something, have it in a private place. You take it for granted like you would. You think you're just having a conversation. But if it's something serious, take it something.
I'm just thinking if something was, people can be very clever.
Oh, yeah.
Do remote microphones and.
Even the age of Facebook and Twitter, everybody's a potential reporter.
Well, there's that.
People pick them up.
Yeah, they don't even have to be a reporter, they could be somebody.
And they just post the right status message and it can get picked up. And,
Yeah. And
Or pick up our cell phone conversation.
And remember that when you're talking on radio too, if things are
radio,
happening
radio.
in a big way, it's just sometimes easy to forget that the radio, everybody's listening to you.
I was just going to say on that same subject, part of that is being calm, because when people get flustered, they start not thinking about,
Yeah.
if you're running to get somewhere where you deal with a problem, and you're talking back.
Yeah, what he's saying is, when people are under a high stress situation, they sometimes forget other people can hear what you're saying, and so you want to be calm, you want to get to some place to do it. The sheriff, so out of Burning Man, for example, sheriffs monitor all of our radio frequencies, so they hear everything that we're saying.
And it's worth understanding that when you're in stress and when your people are in stress, that's an evolutionary reaction. That's fight or flight. That goes all the way back. Your palms get sweaty when you're nervous or when you're facing an uncertain or dangerous situation where you perceive there could be a threat. Your palms are getting sweaty so you can climb a tree. And what's happening in part is that adrenaline is being released into your system. So your ability to work that out physically is going to help you stay calm.
Yeah, very
What I was going to say about kind of radio communication, that sort of stuff. Even if you've got a system that's got set up with a private channel, there's no such thing. Actually, you know.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
and yes, by the way, you can talk about that, earlier.
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
But we've had tons of incidents.
Well, stand up and talk to everybody. So they can-
Okay. We've had a lot of incidents at Alchemy. The first one being Alchemy 2008. We were the tiki torch in the synthetic fiber. Sadly, he did pass about a year later.
Oh, he did? He passed away? Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, God, I didn't know you did that. I'm so sorry.
I thought some prayers go up.
Yeah. But we instilled in our radio basically a code system. So if it was an LEO, we've got a word for LEO interaction if they're on site. If there's an injury, or if we need, EMS, because we actually pay EMS to be on staff, we've got words for that. If there's a kid lost, we've got a term for that. So even if someone's listening,
Always assume they're listening.
yeah, so if anybody's ever actually listening in, because believe me, we've got people that try to come over our perimeter and climb in. We have a perimeter staff with infrared night goggles on that are watching for the locals to kind of crawl over the hill.
Well, even if that guy, you're not a reporter, right? You're still a participant. You could be on God knows what, and you probably don't need to be freaked out with that information. So obviously, sometimes it happens accidentally, but if there's a chance to just walk away from everyone, have the private conversation, because most of the time it'll be fine, but then what about when it's not fine?
Yeah.
Then you have a bigger mess to deal with, and
Yeah.
that sucks.
So we use a code system. Instead of actually saying, there's a kid lost, or, someone just got fried over an ex-team camp. There's a term that we use for each little incident that you could potentially have. And you can come up with your own code system, so it's easy to remember.
There was some troublemakers over here in the corner.
Okay, what we do too is,
Stand up so we can. I know.
the thing that we do is our park's not huge. I mean, it's a decent amount of land, but it's enough that we can all get to each other in like 10 minutes at minimum. And what we'll do is if we want to get away and we want to have a conversation, we'll like in person, face to face now. And we won't say anything. We're just like, this is a critical thing. We need to talk about it. Absolutely. And pretty much like the head team leads, the EMS rangers, they understand when we say face to face now, it needs to happen right that second. We need to talk about it when we step away. And so we don't even get to the codes on the radio. We're just like, now. So that works pretty well for us. But I can see in a bigger location that might not happen because you can't get to people.
Well, it depends on what it is too. If you're talking about an apple, a lost kid, you don't so much need to convene immediately as much as you need everything to lock down immediately. There's a procedure in place for that.
Yeah.
But you need to be able to say that over the radio without the police hearing, we have a lost child, it's terrible, give me that.
Yeah. But that's a separate crisis for us, like something that we really need to like all talk about first.
And it's not a bad idea to put yourself in close proximity to the person in charge of the incident for your community. I do LA decompression media relations just as a volunteer every year, and there was a lost kid, I think, and I had a camera crew following Athena around, and she was getting reports on the radio, and then somebody was telling her, and the reporter was, your son stalks 2 feet away, and I had to ask him to step back and remind Athena to always look around, getting some facts, and she was trying to deal with the situation.
In the spirit of the NASA cafeteria and the microphone always live, is there a way to communicate to staff and volunteers who aren't part of the PR circle that anything they put on Facebook or Twitter, as if you're a geek volunteer, for instance, and you see a thing and you Facebook it, you become a representative?
Yeah, that's excellent. What I would do, as you're planning your event, if you have an all-staff meeting, like Burning Man has multiple all-staff meetings, that's something that I'm probably going to make Megan do it, there stand, but basically say, understand that anything you put out there, you personally will be viewed as a Burning Man spokesperson. And so comport yourself accordingly. And we'll give some scenarios around that. But if you sensitize all of your staff to these things, they'll know that. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if there are, because, we have a decent amount of volunteerism in events, so I'm guessing we could probably organize the team list, but we don't have all staff meetings.
We don't?
No, well, we do for leads.
Well, I see.
And then we have people volunteer at the last minute when they come in, because they're into shifts and they want to volunteer, but they don't like to plan events. I'm guessing most of the regionals deal with similar stuff. Like, at the barn, was there any, I can't really think of a good way besides putting up a sign that would draw more attention to it.
Yeah, just hope. Are you a religious person and pray?
I mentioned that nobody's use the smoke and everybody's just talking, so there's even media people talking as volunteers. Yeah, that's something that we stress to the media team at Burning Man and can be stressed to everybody on your staff for regional events. You're welcome to talk to the press. Well, in an emergency, please don't refer them to us. But even if you're talking to the press about what a beautiful day it is, you're not talking for the event. You're talking as a volunteer, and that is also a tip-off to the reporter that here I have an eyewitness as opposed to somebody who I can quote as the organization says.
Next. Questions, anything else before we go? Absolutely.
From the very beginning, you said about 90% of the people would freak out at a certain thing.
Okay.
How can you prepare your team to, I mean, if you got, say, 10 people, you got 9 of them freaking out at whatever the tragedy, you've got one calm person. How can you kind of, is there a training program for our group?
I'll tell you what I do is with that. First off, if you've done the planning in advance for a scenario like this, when people are freaking out, it's mostly because they don't know what to do or they don't know how to react. If you say, okay, we've had this incident here, and maybe if you have the luxury of running scenarios in advance, typically you don't, you say, all right, here's the situation we're dealing with right here. We've had a person who's severely injured, who's medevaced out, and we've got police on site and everybody's freaking out. Here's what we're going to do. And you huddle them together, give at least the process in place to get the key organizers together and say, here's our plan for this. We have a plan. I'm going to be the spokesperson. We're going to say this information. You feed me information and I'll take care of it. And if you can get people to understand that there is a process in place to handle this, that will calm down a lot. And if you work, again, as you work together more in those situations, they get more accustomed. It's trust, it's everything else. But the key part is if you either run scenarios or you say, here's a plan for this. That'll be like, okay.
I just think that a lot of times that when something happens, people just go straight to
Boom.
freak.
Well, they go so freak
You
that
can't quite bring your best people, how do you bring them, calm them down when something truly tragic has occurred that.
But at that point, people are looking for reassurance, and then you can give it to them, and they'll accept it from you if you already have a relationship with them. Another syndrome that kicks in is not just like people running around panicking, but they'll kick into their mechanical routines if something big is happening. When Kennedy was assassinated, people were typing up forms about it and just doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing. And my favorite moment in the coverage of that thing was some reporter talking live on the air to the first eyewitness who called in and saying, okay, what happened? And this woman saying, oh, it's terrible, I heard 3 shots and the president's brain exploded and the car went down the underpass. And what kind of car was that, What kind of car was it? It was the president's car. And, so people go into their mechanical routines, and that's going to happen to your folks too. So just be ready for them to, the Rangers are going to kick into higher Ranger gear, and people are going to do what they normally do, but just a little bit more intensely and freaked out.
So you know how when we're watching like births on ridiculous TV movies or something, and somebody runs in there all frantic and they say, go boil some water, go get some towels. You don't really need to boil water. What you need is to give them something to do. So they direct that energy.
Yeah. What I'll typically do in a situation is to say, I need you to do something for me. And that's a perfect.
Running that binder.
Yeah. Could you go to my car and get me blah, blah, blah. Or can you go find this person for me. You give someone a very simple task, and I've done this, and that's a perfect entree. Thank you very much. You give them a very simple task to do, and I will typically, in all seriousness, I look at all the other organizers I work with, and I say, who's going to freak? And so I have a plan for that person. I need you to go get this. If you could go get this for me, that would be the best thing you could do for me.
Over this man.
Single-minded, goes like that. I see you go.
How we handle that is, and I got to attend the first time this year, it was really awesome. We have an event called Safety Side where we bring all of our event, all of our safety teams together and do training with each of those groups of people. And the thing they did on Sunday morning was ICS training. It was awesome. That's Incident Command System. And it's standard, it's used by cops, it's used by firefighters, it's used by all kinds of folks. And we put all our people through that training, and we ran scenarios. It was amazing.
Yes. Burning Man has an ICS
Incident
command system. Yeah, Burning Man has an ICS system in place. And what it is, it's a common language that's used by emergency responders, whether it's fire, or paramedics, police, whatever. They know how to, if something bad happens, they know how to interact. it doesn't have to be bad like a shooting or anything. It could be that it rains for 3 days at Burning Man and all of a sudden no RV or any car is going to go anywhere until it dries out. So what do you have to plan for in a scenario like that? How are they going to get the trucks in to pump the toilets out? Or are people going to run out of food? Or if somebody gets injured, how are you going to transport them to the hospital? So I haven't seen our ICS yet, but I mean, that makes the IC there. Lockheed had one, and it had everything from a minor injury to a hazardous material spill to a terrorist attack to literally a nuclear strike. I've seen it, and it was like, Jesus, okay, that's it. Nuclear strike is easy because we're all dead. So, go ahead.
For anybody who's interested in the National Incident Command System, there are free training modules available online that'll take you all the way through different programs for specific types of events. Most of it's offered through FEMA, and you can do it for free.
That's
I totally forgot.
One of the things when we were inventing the emergency broadcast system was, and the scenario we used was rain, was the main thing that we wanted to get out there was to calm people. We have everything we need, let's take care of each other. This is an historic moment in Burning Man, let's enjoy it. But you've got people, you don't want to spread the panic by suddenly telling them all the dangers that could befall them. You want to just, have an overarching calm I mean, that's why everybody turned to Walter Cronkite during the heavy days of his career, is that people want to be reassured. And that's when people, by the way, turn to all-news radio stations. The loyalty to an all-news radio station develops when things are terrible and they need to find out the facts and they need the reassurance. So your ability to do that with a voice, and given the fact that some people may be on different substances or whatever, I mean, you don't know, but you don't want them to sort of half hear something and then in an adult state run around. That's why we ruled out the use of art cars as the sound platforms of Burning Man. We couldn't have people running back to camp saying the bunny rabbit says and trying to repeat that.
So my general question for everything to you is that, so we're all talking about like our leadership and our volunteers, right? Well, I mean, our volunteers are really most of our population. So is there some way to preemptively guide people, like, here's a location, here's a disclaimer, like some vague sentences as to it? So for instance, we barely have internet on site. Like, it's really rare that anybody has internet. Pretty much nobody has phone reception, which is great for us. Unless you go out to the parking lot or something like that. But is there some way to say, if during emergency you leave the site, don't call people yet? Like, I don't know how to suggest that they have some like central source to go to if they're the general public and don't like flip out and start telling everybody.
Again, I would go back to, if you're really serious about planning for these types of emergencies, plan an all-staff meeting in advance and tell them that. That will save you as the communicator or you as the overarching so much hassle, because people will know if all else fails, I can go to first camp, I can go to wherever and just find out what's really going on. And if you become the legitimate source of information, people will trust you. And they'll hear other stuff, they will trust you.
I'm wondering how, because like I said, we don't always have our volunteers signed up in advance. We do have a really strong lead and shift lead structure, so all the leads do, and then all the shift leads do, and there's always a shift lead or lead on duty.
Don't use that. I mean, it's going to adjust based on what your structure is, but all staff meetings are awesome. You can cover a lot of ground with something.
And checklists aren't a bad idea either. The rangers at Burning Man have on the back, because a missing child is considered the most important thing you could have. They've got all 7 steps. First do this, second do that, so that in the event that an inexperienced ranger or somebody who's suddenly being confronted with a situation needs the guide, they know exactly what to do next. So a checklist can work.
And like when the girl took off and left her camp last year, I mean, the first thing they did is they locked down the city. And there was stress among some people saying, oh shit, this is going to make us look bad with the law enforcement, with the public. And I looked at it and said, this is fantastic. I said, what other city of 60,000 people can lock itself down in 5 minutes, to then, make sure that the child doesn't get kidnapped or get out of the way or anything. So that's a great PR angle on that. What we did in the case with her, I mean, and it's going to come up here in just a second, is we wanted, how do you find someone, one person, how do you find that needle in a haystack of 60,000 people? We did research on her, and okay, she wasn't wearing clothes, she was just dressed for very hot weather, and it was going to get cold, so we figured she's probably going to go to a costume camp to get more clothes if she was going to stay. So when we started the search for her, the missing person posters, we immediately got them to costume camps, so they recognized her, and then we went to center camp and things like that, where the mass of people were. We're trying to box her in a sense, so that we could catch her as quickly as possible. catch. That was fine. All right, I'm gonna go quick. No comment. Don't ever say it, for God's sakes. If you say no comment, that sounds like I'm guilty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It becomes the story right there. Burning Man officials are not allowed. You don't have any information. I don't have any information on that right now. You know, I'm not in a position where I have enough to tell you on that. Just don't say no comment. Yeah, let me get back to you. The best PR joke in the world is somebody asks a PR person what time it is to say, let me get back to you. If you walk away from this presentation with one slide or one piece of paper, let it be this one. This is key to doing planning for any sort of emergency. It's in the documentation, it's on the PowerPoint, I've got extra copies here. This is the process for when something goes south. It is.
Use your phone.
No. Let me do it. How am I doing? Like that.
You're not in frame, choose.
Are there no copies of the documentation?
Yeah. And in fact, I'll have it on mine. I got a couple others here. If somebody wants a hard copy right now, whatever. Pass that back.
You know, I'll put it up on the pathways.
Yeah, it'll be
The course of the pathways.
This works for everything. If you follow this process, when the shit hits the fan, you're 90% of the way there to being okay, to keeping everybody calm on this. Generically, something bad happens. The first thing you want to do is collect and verify information, because you're going to get all kinds of rumors. This happens at Burning Man all the time. You know, 5 people were injured, 10 people were injured, 2 people were burned. It's like, unless somebody comes to me and says, I tell someone, go find out how many people were hurt and come back to me and make sure it's verified. So you send people out to gather that information so you know exactly what you're talking about. It may come from the police, but whatever. You don't want to speculate on anything. You want to know exactly what you're dealing with.
Make sure you know the people you're sending out to. You don't want them just to pick up rumors and come back and repeat them to you. Make sure that you can trust the people, that they're bringing back verified facts. And one thing that I did a few years ago is I decided to become a ranger back in like 2007 or no 2008. And I took the training and I did my mentoring shift. 3 days later, I had a heart attack on the quiet and got pulled out. But I was an official ranger, and I kept my training up year by year so I could wear the t-shirt, so if anything happened, I could wander in and get ranger information without question. And that was the only reason I kept the training up. I kept the ranger status. I don't have it anymore, but it worked once or twice.
It is key that you always operate off of information you are 100% solid on. If you're not 100% solid, don't repeat it to anybody else. Whatever you've got. It may be people were injured, but you don't know how many. Okay, we did have some injuries. We don't know the extent or the number of those injuries. But you do know some people were injured. Do you know that they've been medevaced or taken out? Okay, we know they've been taken to area hospitals. We don't know what those hospitals are. Stick to what you know.
And the old saying in Chicago is, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
Second thing on this, identify the desired results you want to achieve in distributing this information. It may be that, boom, something just exploded. You're standing there in Edie Mecca and all of a sudden you see a mushroom cloud over by 3 o'clock. It's like, fine. So you send people out to find out what happened. What do you want to do with that base amount of information? It might be just to use that first phrase, because you know you're going to be hit with media. You know, we don't have a lot of information. You know, our hearts and prayers go out to the people, we're cooperating with authorities. We'll get back to you on this stuff. You want to figure out what you want to achieve in getting this message out. Is it calming the populace? You know, is it getting some information out to the press? Figure out what those goals are, because that's going to affect it. The next 3 things you can do simultaneously, and you may have done it in advance. We've already talked about audiences. I guarantee you, Marion's going to freak out about this stuff. You want it, Marion is an audience. The LLC is an audience. Law enforcement is going to be an audience. The populace is going to be an audience. Reporters are going to be an audience. Facebook crowd's going to be an audience. So you want to think about all these audiences who are going to be looking to find information and spread it out there. Everybody loves to be the first person to put information out. So you can that into advance. Think about who your spokespeople are going to be. If it's something terrible, I'm making Megan do it, because I can do that. So Megan is, I decided Megan's going to be the spokesperson on anything awful that happens. Identify the platforms that you're going to use. You have a bunch of them. You've got if it were Burning Man, you've got the radio stations, you've got a press conference you can do. If you have internet connectivity, you can go out on Facebook. TV stations all over, for us at Burning Man, TV stations all over the Bay Area follow Burning Man on Facebook. I've seen them pull photos off of it, I've seen them pull quotes, put the quotes on TV. So you've got Facebook you can work with, Twitter goes bonkers. You know, we're going to have more internet connectivity whether we like it or not out there. Think about the same for your regional events. How much connectivity you have and what the likelihood of something getting out is.
And you're going to want to, at that point, not only when you're talking about IDing the spokespeople, make sure that the people who you've identified know that they've been identified as potential spokespeople and give them a little training, give them a little rehearsal, that kind of thing. And also make sure that they know that, as Jim was saying, bad news doesn't necessarily have to come from the top person. Eisenhower always made the departments announce the bad news and the White House would announce the good news. And you can play that too. And you probably, if things are really happening and you've got all these multiple platforms, you might want to have a person dedicated to monitoring what's going on, what's being said, listening to the radio station, watching what's on the Twitter world, and that kind of stuff, so that if there are rumors, you're becoming aware of them. If there's misperceptions, you know something needs to be addressed. You're not going to have time to listen to everything. And you can't, 3 days later, come back to first day news and try and correct it. So just make sure that you're aware of what people are reporting as well.
Yeah. So, all right, so you've got your platforms out there. Once you've got this in place, once you've got the information and you've got your results, then you develop your key messages. I see people in a lot of situations, murder and otherwise, immediately try to jump to the key messages without having solid information. And they'll just say, we want to calm everybody down, so we're just going to tell them this. And then they find out afterward it's not true. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot, and you're going to lose your credibility with everybody. You only want to go on the information you've got. So long as you keep that discipline, they may not like you, but they're going to respect you. So develop your key messages. Then what you're going to do is you're going to parse the message. And this sounds very specific, but if you just follow this, it works really well. You're going to take each of those messages and parse it to fit with the platform. So Twitter, you've got 140 characters, which you want to get out. Facebook, you've got a little bit more. Radio, you've got different things. You want to structure those messages and give them to the spokespeople who are going to handle that specific thing. And it may just be you're the one individual who's going to be doing all of this stuff, or you might have a team. And I'm fortunate that I've got a team of people I can rely on, and we'll distribute stuff. Then you distribute the messages. It all goes out there, and you hope for the best. You distribute it. What you do then is you track for coverage, and what you look for particularly is how effective are your key messages getting out there. They call it echo, they call it resonance, whatever. Are people accurately getting your key messages out there to the wider audience?
Consistency.
What's that?
Consistency.
Consistency, exactly. And then what you do, the last part, is you gauge your reaction against what your desired results were. You had these key messages there. Are people calmer as a result? Do they feel they have enough information on the injured individuals? You just gauge how they respond to it. And they talk everywhere. ePly is a perfect one for that. And then it starts over again. Once your first day stories are done, now what's everybody saying? Start collecting that information again. Now what do we have to tell people based on this? And it's just an ongoing loop of judging what we have coming in and then adjusting your message when it goes out. If you follow this one thing, it's 90% of the battle right there to manage a situation. Things will always get out of control, but that will give you the discipline to do it. You're there, but let me go with her first.
So my thing that I feel like I might doubt myself on is like I said, we don't have that much connectivity. But at what point do we preemptively get information out where it may not be? Like say there's nothing on Facebook. Like say no one's been able to make a phone call, no one's got out, but you know they're gonna hear eventually. Yeah. So at what point do you jump on that and tell your community before they really know?
Give me a scenario. Walk me through a scenario.
It's kind of hard. Like, so we don't necessarily have our Facebook status is very different now. Like our Facebook people are really active, they're really into it. It's much more of a thing than it used to be.
Yeah.
So, for instance, with our ticket sales, that's not a crisis, right? That when people didn't know what was going on, when the server was breaking, everybody started making assumptions that things were going on. They're like, oh my God, we're sold out. We don't know what's happening. And so we had to come up with fairly quickly, well, he did.
Well, here's what we did. It worked. We just basically said, we're monitoring the situation. We're going to tell you everything in great detail and total honesty, but we just don't know it all yet. Hang in there and wait to see what happens and you'll hear from us.
Yeah.
You got to follow up on that. You got to give a detailed report, which we did, and that put out all the fires. But at the time, but don't wait, get out there quickly and say, we know that this is a disaster.
Oh,
I realize, we're talking about our community here, instead of the media. I realize the media maybe, well, they don't give a crap about tickets. I would never say that if it was somebody injured or anything like that. Talking about our community on Facebook, we said, well, we know that this is not a good situation and you're not happy, and we're not happy either, and we're gonna figure out what happened and give you a full report. In the meantime, we're monitoring the situation.
Awesome.
And that's fantastic. I guess I'm saying if there's a very limited amount of people that are really upset at the time, but you know it's gonna spread, so maybe you preemptively get everybody else upset by telling them things going on.
Do you have, you know what, in a situation like that, where if you think it's gonna blow up, I always like to try and get in front of a bad thing before it happens. So, because you can start to diffuse it, and then you become kind of the spokesperson. So, I know something's gonna blow up, I may put some information, but you have, if you use Facebook in a situation like that, you have to keep monitoring. It's not like you can drive out, post something, and then drive back into your event where you have no connectivity. Once you start posting in that medium, you've got to stay. Does that work?
Yeah, so even, to follow up on that, so even if we had something major happen at our event, I was thinking, should I go out, post something on our website, post something on Facebook, then come back and deal with it in the community, so when people that aren't at the event start hearing about things, they hear about it from us first.
That's not a bad idea. One thing you want to be careful of when you're doing that is to make sure there are no surprises for others who should be not surprised. The bureaucratic creed is no surprises. So if you should be calling the other members of the LLC, or you should be alerting the landowner, whatever the situation is, make sure that the stakeholders who should be told in advance are told in advance. Another thing, that if you don't have a lot of information, saying something once and the information doesn't really change, remember that people are on news cycles, which means that in radio they have to be at the top of the hour, and they're going to go with new information. That's one reason that radio stations and any newsroom rewrites the news if they're presenting it over and over again. They've got to make it sound different. They always write in the present or future tense. So your ability to help them do that, and to, if they say, can you come live with us every half hour for the next 2 hours on morning television or something like that, you may have to, but then you can provide them with a different narrative. When we have water mains break and thousands of people are out of water in Chicago, I'm happy to step on in front of the camera and just say, we're ahead of schedule, which means absolutely nothing. But the reporters will all start out with, the city says it's ahead of schedule and fixing the come up with something that sounds immediate, sounds optimistic, and if you can, but gives them a new little bit of narrative that changes the story perspective just a little bit.
All right, there's your key. Take questions, and you're on kicking off.
Okay, I just have one slightly different scenario that I've had to deal with a few times in the past. Is what we like to call the rabbit things out and high called community member who kind of blows up on the list and says you're doing it wrong very differently day after day after day. What advice then do you have to do it? I mean, obviously you tend to let them run out of steam a bit and then come back with a very long list of facts.
You know about somebody who's just like sniping at you?
Yes, someone set up an entire anti-event blog box. And in that case, she referenced Wikipedia and said that to the impressions, does that sound anything like none of the impressions? So I rewrote Wikipedia article so that it did. And making lots of accusations about things that we weren't looking after people and really kind of nasty stuff and saying that we don't care.
But there's two things that I do with that kind of thing. Number one, a blowhard like that is probably known to the community. Yeah. And they're going to consider the source and just say, yeah, so-and-so blows up at everything. Another thing you can do is call them up personally and offer them an explanation and I do that when there's a crank in the neighborhood in Chicago all the time because I figure this is the neighborhood blabbermouth and I'd rather have them at least say they got a phone call or something like that. But you don't need to respond to everybody who says it, makes an accusation and that kind of stuff. And if you stay silent, then the accusation goes away sometimes.
In social media 101 yesterday, this came up and Will Chase said that it's your board. If they're consistently terrible, you can ban them, and as a policy across the board, do not feed the trolls. And that it seems in talking to other regional events, what they tend to do is go for a Facebook page where they're the ones creating the content and controlling what goes as a post, not the comments, as opposed to a Facebook group, which anybody can create. And that may be one way of handling it, but it just seems like
like a certain amount of discontent just happens.
You just get happy. I'll tell you, one of the things I've been known to do is I'll contact someone who's friendly and I'll say, hey, help a brother out. Could you kind of respond to what this person's saying and just say, you know, it's not really, how you're describing it is not really the way it is. So you start to chip away at the troll's credibility. If you've got not you as the organizer, but another person who's attendee, just say, that's not how it was. You know, that's a misrepresentation. And so I'll call in favors like that all the time. Not all the time, right? Did you?
Yeah.
Go.
This is a little different disaster, but it happened to us and it can happen to you. So I really want these guys to give a comment on it, but in 2008, a concerned citizen in the local area decided the world would be a lot better place if we weren't allowed to have our event. So in between ticket sales, when all tickets have been sold, and the event happening, when the board members are all over the order, because we're not located in the central city, she contacted, not LEOs, she contacted the media and told them that children were being exposed to sex and drugs at Transformers. And what are we going to do to protect the children? The result was, the press couldn't find anybody from the board or any official to speak, but we're on private land, and they knew the landowner, who was a very well-known person there. So he's walking down the street in his hometown, and suddenly a van pulls up, camera to the face, and the reporter is saying, what do you think about children being exposed to sex and drugs on your land during this horrible hit event, you know?
They already ambushed him.
And they did, they totally ambushed him. I mean, they just jumped on him, and he was like, it's not a problem, he said, because we don't allow children in Transformers.
Is that true?
No! We had sold tickets to families with children already, but suddenly he had a rule that we couldn't have children on his land during Transformers. That's what can happen. Your board can be totally ready, but if you're on private land or you have anybody else the press can find and stick a camera in their face, they may come out with something. We still can't have children at Transformers at Deerfields because they've never relaxed that rule because of that media ambush. So what I'm saying is, what can we do to be ready for a sudden media ambush?
Let me back
It's
to
not happening.
I think in part, you probably get a strong contract with your landowners that you couldn't do that, could you?
Yeah.
And that you have a proper lawyer and you can say whatever your expectations were, and the contract said that children would be on site, you would be able to do that.
Oh, I would agree with that, but that's hindsight, you know, for everybody else, that's a great idea. You don't have a better contract with your landlord.
Did the landowner report that to you immediately, or did?
No,
Okay,
those are the best ones. It's like, what the hell? I'll tell you a long-term strategy for anyone who's planning an event is to go out and do stuff with other community groups. So the mindset of people in the community of birders is not that they're hippie freaks, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But that I mean, at Santa Cruz, we did things with Second Harvest Food Bank. We do a film festival. And we always had an argument over the pricing, $15 for streetwear and $12 plywear. Fuck that. It's like, what I did is $15 streetwear, $12 if you brought 3 cans of food that we would donate to Second Harvest Food Bank. Second Harvest Food Bank was a marketing machine. And so they said, hey, Burger Man, you worked with us on this stuff. They're fantastic. We did things with a homeless shelter. We did some things with a women's shelter. So all of a sudden, we were no longer viewed as a bunch of hippie, freaks. We were helping out in the community. So they try to attack with that. We say, we believe in a family, it's a family event. It's art. You turn it away from everything like that. It's just, I'm disappointed somebody would say something like this. We work with community.
Oh, that's a good phrase.
See, actually,
anyone would say that about us.
Yeah, see, when I use the word disappointed, it really means I want to choke somebody.
Right.
But I'm really disappointed that they said that, because we work with Group A, Group B, Group C. This is all about art. It is a family event. It's, it's for all ages. And it's fantastic. It's creativity. It's art. It's performance. It's everything. That's why people come.
And also brief, if you have a private landlord or somebody like that, brief them ahead of time, just in case they get ambushed.
Yeah, and tell them, let me call you. I mean, the best thing if a reporter calls you and says, I'm in a meeting right now, let me call you back in 15 minutes. You buy yourself 15 minutes to
and contact us,
Yeah, exactly. Does that help a little bit? I mean, that'll get you out of the ambush.
Yeah.
You're saying, do you want to say something? You got something?
Oh, I was just, commiserating with the subject.
By the way, this as an aside too, we have a urban Iditarod, they call it the Shite Iditarod, which is people racing around with decorated shopping carts and that kind of stuff, and hitting cars, and it's pretty much of a disruption of the whole town. And, but we turned it into a civic event by making it a food drive, in the same spirit that he associated with charities and stuff. But the other thing we did was realizing the police love arm patches. This doesn't go over well in Europe, where it's considered a security threat, but they trade them. They trade their municipal arm patches at their meetings. So we printed up an extra 100 embroidered patches, and every time on the first year when cops came up to find out what these hooligans were up to and cause us trouble, we started out the conversation by saying, hey fellas, how about a couple of patches? And suddenly we were talking their language. We weren't getting them to stand down, we were just saying, we had a rapport going based on their symbols. So don't be afraid to understand their language, whether it's a politician or a police or a reporter or somebody else, and understand that there's a symbolic exchange that can also create rapport.
Okay, we're getting close on time, I'm pretty sure. Any
12:45.
other questions we want to cover or anything like this? Go! You're the one with all the questions in the back.
So, I was thinking about the whole clothing looking good aspect, right? And like, I haven't brought like an extra outfit, and it was like kind of on that for in the past. So, what if you're in an emergency situation, you're running around everywhere, and somebody catches you in like, I mean, I walk around in a bikini a lot, you know, that kind of thing. What if you're like, hey,
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
If you all set up over here, we're gonna give you a statement. Just start setting up, and we'll be right back. And then confer with people.
It's like I'm dealing with this right this second. Could you give me a second to go?
Exactly. Yeah. Nothing is immediate like that. It's like you say, look, can I come back? A perfect example is three winters ago, a tree fell on my house at Thanksgiving. So my first call was to the fire department, because I know the fire chief. I said, hey, could you guys come over here and like have this thing out of my roof? And they're like, yeah. My second phone call was to a TV station, because hey, I'm press right there for that. But what I forgot was I was in pajamas. So the press shows up, I'm like, oh crap. And they said, well, we're only going to shoot you from the chest up. I said, can I just put a shirt on? They go, yeah, no problem. So, I mean, they typically will only shoot you from the shirt up, and I did a great interview with pajamas. So they will give you time to do that, because they want you to look good.
But don't assume the shirt talking is okay. Sure.
I have a couple quick things. My name is Megan Miller, Public Relations Manager for Burning Man, also who Jim likes to pick on. We work at HQ together, and I just want to put it out there that if you guys have questions about how we handle things at any given time, I know they're going to give you their contact information. You can also send an email to press@burningman.com. We can help you out in that way as well. One thing that didn't come up that just I remembered after last year's experience was it's good to contact the public information officers for any law enforcement agencies that may be present at your event or may become present in the event of a disaster. So I made all those contacts before the event last year, and it came in handy several times to know who to go to, who was going to be the spokesperson for those agencies. And totally unrelated, posters for this year's event available in the lobby over lunch.
Do we just call the cops and say, hi, I'm involved with an event where something terrible might happen and I want to know who your spokesperson is?
Yes, exactly. And they'll appreciate it. They were very appreciative, and several of the agencies on Playa asked me to be the conduit for the information because they don't necessarily want to be talking to the reporters, the people on Playa. They have their information officers, which may not be at the event.
Okay, so I could say, hi, I'm looking for your information officer?
Yeah, who would speak to the press in the event of a crisis?
But what you're also saying is I want you to know who to contact on our staff.
Exactly.
You're introducing yourself as well as identifying who your target is. And we asked yourself up there about, remember that the comfort level is everything to a bureaucrat. So if you have a little bit of an advanced relationship with them, and you've shown them enough respect and enough coherence to call them up and say, we don't expect anything to happen, but give some reward to. Who would I call, or who would I immediately get in touch with? And then they're calm about it, and they know you know how to act.
All right, last thing, because you've suffered through this presentation, you get the benefit of if anything goes south at one of your events, you can call either of us. These are our cell phone numbers. And you can call us anytime, day or night.
Yeah.
I would please ask that you call Tom first. I know in my new role I'm going to be super busy all the time. And I will confer with Tom on things. Call him first on these things.
I will be your first responder.
Your first responder. And we are here, we're from Burning Man, and we're here to help. I love saying that. That's it.